Welcome to my 268th video on my work with OO gauge. This video will just be by way of a fairly brief follow-up to my previous video, part 267, in which I repaired, serviced and ran a 3-rail kit-built model of a Midland 2P440 tender locomotive that I bought on eBay. That model required one additional repair that I didn't get round to doing as of my previous video. The cab steps on the right side were missing, and in this video I'll just be addressing that repair. See the previous video, part 267, for full details on this model and some history on the actual prototype. This is the model as I received it, quite an impressive kit-built representation of the Midland 483 class, very handsome in its crimson livery, at least I thought so. When I received the model, it was actually a non-runner, not responding at all to power applied to the wheels and centre pickups. As you may see in part 267, I did manage to service the model and get it running quite well. I noticed when I inspected the model after I unpacked it that the cab steps were missing on the right-hand side. This model was apparently built from a white metal kit, and it is extremely solid and heavy, loco and tender together weighing a pound or so, around 500 grams. Here's the other side of the loco cab showing the steps there. There should of course be similar steps to this on the other side of the cab. When I was initially working on this model, I did look at what my options might be for replacing the missing steps. I had some spare parts from plastic loco bodies, but the steps I had from that source were much too small, as seen at top left here. About the closest pre-made steps that I had were on a tender from a mainline Jubilee, as at right here, but even those were a bit too small, and anyway I didn't particularly want to cut up that perfectly good tender for parts. So I basically concluded that if I was going to fit new cab steps to the 2P, I was going to have to make the new steps myself, and I wasn't too sure how to even begin to go about that, so I put the step repair issue aside for further thought whilst I went on with the rest of the repair and servicing of this model. So I slept on the problem, and it seemed to me that the best approach to creating new steps for the cab side would be to use styrene sheet. The required steps were basically just a flat part with some square ribs attached, so making something pretty close from styrene shouldn't be hopelessly challenging. I used a paper to establish the required shape for the main part of the new steps. It would have been best if I could have just put the paper behind the existing steps and drawn round them, but that wasn't possible as the inside of the steps was attached to body parts, so you couldn't get a paper behind. So I held the paper in front of the steps, lined up with the running board, and drew a line marking the required length of the steps. Then I measured the width of the steps at top and bottom, marked those widths on my paper, and then did my best to draw the curved outline of the other side of the steps, joining to the correct widths at top and bottom. I laid my paper over the corner of a sheet of 60 thou styrene sheet and cut through my lines on the paper, scoring the shape into the surface of the styrene sheet. Then I progressively cut all the way through the styrene sheet, freeing my part. I cleaned the part up with a file and sandpaper and tried it against the existing steps. It looked fairly close to the correct size and shape. To make the pieces for the steps themselves, I cut slivers from a piece of plastic that I had left over from a ratio kit. You can actually buy square styrene rod, which would have been ideal for this in the correct size, but I didn't have any of that on hand, only round styrene rods which weren't suitable, and I couldn't be bothered to make a special trip to a hobby store. I cut one of my slivers of brown plastic down to the correct length for the middle step by holding it against the white part and marking the length to cut with a pencil. I used polystyrene cement to glue that step onto the centre of my step backing. Then I cut 2 more pieces to length and glued them on. Not exactly a precision-made part, but pretty close to matching the existing steps. I attached my newly fabricated steps to the right side of the cab with CA glue, on top and behind the steps. There was quite a lot of surface available to allow for solid attachment of the steps. I might have been better to have just glued on the two steps and not the back piece at the top, as there was already part of the body coming down behind the steps there. I got out some paint to colour the new steps. I used some Model Master British Crimson enamel, into which I previously mixed some black to better match it with LMS Crimson Lake. It was a bit hard brush painting these steps. The thin paint tended to be drawn up into the corners by the action of surface tension, resulting in paint that was too thick in the corners and too thin to cover well over the flat white surfaces. I let the paint dry and then applied another thin coat over the flat surfaces to hide the white. You can see that my bottom step shifted a bit after I initially glued it before the glue fully set, and so it's on a little crooked, not lined up with the bottom of the backing part. Fortunately, when the model is viewed in any normal sort of way, it isn't really noticeable. That step isn't quite aligned with the bottom of the backing, so I decided that I could live with the repair like this. Here's the loco with its tender back on my 3-rail tracks. My repair isn't the best, but I do think it's definitely better than simply having those steps missing. And now I'll finish with one more little run of this model on my Dublo tabletop. Okay, well, now I've done as best as I can with repairing that step. Let's just finish with one more run of this if we can. I'm going in the other direction basically just because I wanted to park it so that the step I repaired, oops, in reverse, because I'd reversed the train up to the engine up to the train to connect it. Yeah, I put it we're going the opposite way around because I wanted the step that I'd repaired to be on the near side, at this side of the layout. Anyway, so that's about it. I don't think I'm intending to do any more to this. Famous last words. There's no good place to park it, of course, now, but what the hell. I really should try and get new brushes for it. The brushes are not good, but otherwise, I'm very, very pleased with this model on the whole. I'm not super pleased with my step repair, but it's better than having no step, and generally I'm very impressed with the build quality of this kit-built model.